Hi, I'm Michael, and welcome to Beyond the Screenplay, the podcast where each week we do a conversational deep dive analysis into a film. Today we are talking about Lady Bird, the 2017 film written and directed by Greta Gerwig. I'm joined by the Beyond the Screenplay team, Trisha Rand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
Hello.
And Alex Coyotes.
Hi.
Okay, so before we dive into Lady Bird, quick reminder for people that might have forgotten, all of these video podcasts are available on YouTube, or if you are listening in Spotify app, you can open up the video and watch us as we talk about all these things. So either head to the Spotify app if you haven't, or head to YouTube and subscribe there, where you can see us in living color as we discuss and be brilliant as we always are.
You can also put a Post-it note on your screen over any of us and then look at the rest of us.
Wow.
Yeah.
What an idea, Brian.
I'm just saying, look, I've got to look at me all the time. Don't need that.
Let us know in the comments who you put the Post-it over.
Yeah.
As you watch us be brilliant.
Yes. As we are now. For our next episode, so everyone can prepare, we have something special. We are going to talk about Shawshank Redemption. And the reason that this is special is our producer extraordinaire, Vince Major, has been hounding me, asking politely for years and years, Michael, when are you going to do a Lessons from the Screenplay video about Shawshank Redemption? That never happened. When are we going to talk about Shawshank Redemption for the podcast? That never happened, because this is his favorite movie of all time. And you would think, were I a better friend, we would have done something about this. Now, there was a plan at one point to do a surprise episode for him where we release it. We record the Shawshank Redemption and release it on his birthday without him knowing, but that fell through. And so we're just going to do it because otherwise it's not going to happen. So the next episode is coming
anticlimactic, that story. It's just all the good ideas fell through, so now we're just going to do it anyway.
Yeah. No surprise, no nothing.
Unlike the movie The Shawshank Redemption, there are no fun twists to discover here.
It's the thought that counts. It's a thing people say. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it. If you have seen it, if you have thoughts about what you would like us to talk about, head over to the Patreon, where there's a post waiting for you, where you can share your thoughts and tell us what things we should pay attention to, what things you'd like us to talk about on the podcast, and we will do such things. And now let's talk about Lady Bird. So I saw Lady Bird when it came out. I loved it, thought it was fantastic, and hadn't really thought about it since. And so going into this was like, I think I liked that movie. I mean, I know I liked it. I don't remember that much about it, but yeah, let's watch it again. Watching it again reminded me how much I loved it and how fantastic this movie is and how amazing the script is and the directing and the performances. It's just a very, very good movie. I also remember now, because I was thinking as I was watching this, like, why didn't this win Best Screenplay? Like, what the hell? This is so good. And then remember that this was the year that Get Out was also nominated, and Get Out ended up winning, and remembering watching the Oscars and being like, I would be happy if either of these won. Like, this is so intense. So yeah, this movie is great. Nominated, for Best Picture, Screenplay, Director, performances for both Saoirse Ronan and Laurie Metcalf, all of which are excellently executed and very well deserved. And there's a lot of things that I look forward to talking to you guys about in this movie, because I think structurally it's really interesting. It's very well observed. The dialogue does so much with so little. The ending is kind of interesting, and I want to talk about how all of that lands. The editing is amazing. It's really funny. So lots of things to talk about. But yeah, just overall impression is this movie is amazing and it's great. And I think I liked it even more the second time. So that is me. Trisha, tell me about Lady Bird.
Yeah, similar to you, I saw it in the Oscar season of that year in my I do my best picture screenings and I curate a little meal that goes with it for friends, or I used to do that. And so we did like school lunch, and I think we had like Lunchables and little sandwiches, and I made chocolate chip cookies, and it was just a great time. And this movie is all the things you said. It's really funny. It's really sharp and just, very well observed. I love the dynamic in the family, the dynamic with her and her friends. The editing really stuck out to me this time around. It's doing so much, so deftly. It's amazing. And there's all of these disparate story threads that the movie like puts down and picks back up at exactly the right moment. It feels like we're, always tracking with where Lady Bird is on her journey. And it somehow comes together as the movie like builds towards its finale, which I definitely also do want to talk about. It's one of those movies that's a classic example of specificity as universality, right? Like, I think you can see, it's interesting that this movie is so grounded in its sense of place, right? It's a movie about Sacramento, and it tells you that a lot. And I love that. Like, I love that the movie feels like it's of our world. It is telling a story of people we know and knew in high school. And like the movie also is really grounded in time, right? It's 2002 to 2003. And, there's news broadcasts all the time, and they're talking about the Iraq War, and they're talking about 9/11, and like, the movie is firmly planting itself in our reality and invites us to watch it in our reality. And at the same time is a comedy. So there, are these kind of really comedic moments that would never happen in real life, but they still feel like knit into the fabric of the world in a really organic way. It's wonderful. All the supporting characters have these fantastic little moments that make them distinct and yet also funny and poignant. And also it's meaningful to me. I went to a tiny Christian school and traveled all the way to the other side of the country to go to college, a fact that my mother did not like. And there's a lot here for me, I think, that I was really struck by this time around, having a little bit of distance on that time in my life. So.
Yeah, it is interesting, like watching this movie being of this generation. I am curious, like what like a Gen Zer would make of this, right, for example. But we don't have any of those with us, so we'll have to just move on from that thought. Alex, tell me about Lady Bird.
Yeah, you guys really said it all. It's just a lovely, lovely movie. And I also loved it when I saw it in theaters for the first time, and watching it again was just like, yeah, damn, this is just so well done. And you both have mentioned the editing, and I have to also mention the editing. I think there's something about this movie that just feels so sharp and perfect in its pacing. Yeah. I never feel like a scene lingers too long. It always cuts out at just the right moment. I get a little taste, a little vignette, a little moment, and then we're out. And I never am kind of like feeling like there's a part that drags, or like, okay, I've had enough of this plot line. It's just always moving, but it's not also giving me whiplash. I'm not feeling like it's overly cutty or overly, fast paced. I'm just kind of along for this really pleasurable ride that is giving me exactly what I need and want, and nothing more, nothing less. And that is really a feat to just have a movie that feels so precisely put together that it feels effortless. There's no fat, but what's there feels like a meal. It doesn't feel lean either. So that's what's kind of magical about this movie. It's very efficient, yet it doesn't feel like an efficient movie in the sense of like, oh man, it was so lean and tight that like I barely, got to simmer in the space with the people. Like, I feel like this whole movie I'm simmering in the space with these people, but it's also efficient and tight and great. So that there's kind of a magic about it that is pretty rare. And I can't think of many other movies that feel both like a Richard Linklater-y Boyhood vibes, like meets just like sheer efficiency of editing and pacing and writing. It's really, really cool to see those both in one movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like, when Timothy Chalamet showed up, I was like, all right, this guy's in this. All right, Dune. But my memory,
Paul.
once I remembered that, I was like, oh, and he's in so much of this movie too. But he's not. Like, he's in very little of this movie, actually. Like, this movie really moves along, as we're saying, super efficiently, but when it's there and it's doing what it needs to do. And so I remember these things as taking a long time and having spent a bunch of time in this world, but it does move along very efficiently. And it's very hard, as you're saying, Alex, to strike that balance. Brian, what about you?
Yeah, to echo what both Trisha and Alex were saying, like Trisha, you were talking about the time that it's set. And it's interesting because it feels like a period piece, but not in that kitschy, remember this song kind of way. Like when you do hear, like, what is it? Justin
Dave Matthews Band?
Well, Dave Matthews, sure. But that's
Crash Into Me, Cry Me a River by Justin Timberlake,
Cry Me a River, yeah.
Crossroads.
Right. But a lot of those are like mid 90s or late 90s things, right? So it's like, which I always appreciate. I hate whenever a period thing is like, the only music that existed in a 1994 thing is music that came out in 1994. That's all anyone ever listens to. That's all. I'm like, no, not really. And so I appreciate that it never, like, even those songs, other than Crash Into Me, like, even those songs are kind of in the background. They're just like playing in the bar, right? The thing is never, and 2002 is not that long ago, right? But if you watch something like Pen 15, it is a little like we're trying to use the internet. Like, how does chat rooms work? Like because that's the point of the show. Like, the show is having fun with it. But this movie just feels, I think Greta Gerwig said she wanted it to feel like a memory, like a documentary, like something that wasn't trying to be sort of kitschy about how it was. And then Alex, what you were saying about the pacing, like that was the big takeaway I had this time around watching it, was just apparently the original script was like 350 pages. Like, she had so much. And usually when you have that, you would then have to take it into like a 2.5 hour movie or a 2 hour movie, right? But this is a 94-minute movie, right? Like, she really did the work to say, like, well, what is really needed here? But as you were saying, Michael, it feels like in 94 minutes, it feels like you are going on this journey because of the pacing, because of the vignettes, of just like, I think I paused it for a second just because like I had to do something. And only 2 minutes had gone by, but it had already been like, I felt like I'd already seen like 4 scenes or something. But it's a really nice blend of, here is 5 seconds of a musical rehearsal, and here's 5 seconds of like they're running around eating French fries, and here's 5 seconds of this, and then we have a nice normal 3-minute scene where it's like we really get to check in with the characters and see what's going on, and then we're back to it. I think the only time, like Act 2B, kind of between hooking up with Timothy Chalamet and like the whole third act, like getting into college thing, there's a little bit of like, well, wait, what's supposed to happen next? Like, what are we waiting for to happen? But that's like, I don't know, 10 minutes maybe. And the rest of the movie feels like I always know exactly where we just came from and exactly where we're going. And because of that, I mean, you said it perfectly, Alex. It feels like we're going on a ride, but it never feels like we're going too fast or too slow. It just, everything feels correctly told.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and the part that you're talking about, Brian, I think what you're getting at there is the dramatic question.
Yeah.
I feel like this movie is so good at keeping us on the ride of what the dramatic question is sort of in Lady Bird's life. And so it's interesting, it's like when she's involved in one of the two romantic relationships that she gets involved in, there's an inherent dramatic question there, right? So it's like when we're watching the play rehearsal, when we're watching, the scenes of her at home where her dad's helping her with financial aid and all this stuff, the dramatic question is still like, well, what's going to happen between her and Danny, right? Like, how is that? Where is that going? And then when that resolves, we're almost immediately into like the next romantic relationship that kind of creates a new dramatic question. And then there are longer dramatic questions that we are kind of wondering about, right? Which is college applications and especially her relationship with her best friend, the Beanie Feldstein character. And so I think that there's a moment in Act 2B that you're identifying, Brian, where she dumps Timothy Chalamet, makes up with Beanie Feldstein, and then we kind of forget what the dramatic question is because she and her mom aren't fighting at that moment.
Right. And we haven't talked about college in maybe 20 minutes or so.
We haven't talked about college in a little while. And I actually think it's smart because then it creates that moment right at the dinner table where they're out to eat and they're all like, yay, congrats to graduation. Congrats about that. And then Danny comes up and he's like, hey, what about waitlist?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It creates that like, oh my God, I forgot about that. That's going to be, the crisis. So I kind of love that it like lulls us into this false sense of like,
just
well, everything's great with her. Yeah. But then it drops that bomb. But yeah, I think it's really deft writing to continually have various dramatic questions handing off to each other, like what we're looking for in the next scene.
Yeah.
And even in the little scenes where we're just getting a montage that feels like it's doing the passing of time or something, it's not like those tiny little montages aren't also doing character work, right?
Sure.
And usually doing plot work as well, even in very small ways. So it is just like, yeah, I don't know. It feels like a magic trick. It makes me wonder how much of those really short scenes they shot, right? Like if I only see like 2 seconds of them standing in the chapel, getting the Ash Wednesday cross put on their heads, how much of that scene did they shoot to get those like 2 moments or whatever?
Was that a whole 5-minute sequence that then got cut down to 5 seconds or something? Yeah.
And if so, what discipline in the edit?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Lady Bird is, in a way, a period piece. 2002, much as I hate to admit it, was 2 decades ago. And while it's recent history, it's still a time that is very different from our own. If you're creating a story set in a different time or place, and you need to properly convey the peculiarities of that setting, you need the right tools to bring your vision to life. Storyblocks is a royalty-free stock library that makes it possible for creators to keep up with the growing demands for modern video content, so you can bring all your stories to life and stop sacrificing your vision due to time, budget, or resources. Unlike traditional stock sites that limit content with a pay-per-clip model, Storyblocks gives you unlimited downloads so you can create more. They have images and illustrations, audio and sound effects, and high-quality video and video templates. And Storyblocks has a selection of flexible subscriptions, so you can focus on creating instead of worrying about budget. To start to bring your vision to life, check out Storyblocks and sign up for their unlimited all-access plan. Head to storyblocks.com/beyondthescreenplay. Once again, that's storyblocks.com/beyondthescreenplay. The link is also in the show notes. Thanks to Storyblocks for sponsoring Beyond the Screenplay.
Well, and I remember listening to a lot of interviews with Greta Gerwig during Oscar season this year and Lady Bird year. She talked about how her writing process for this, it took place over several years, and she was just kind of starting from a place of just seeing scenes in her mind, scenes between these characters popping up and just like exploring those scenes. And it was kind of, I think the reason the script was so long at first was because she just basically wrote like this pastiche of scenes from this year in this character's life, and then was like, okay, what do I have here? I've got all these scenes. Mm-hmm. What is this movie? And I think, like you're saying, Trisha, it's a real testament to both the writing and editing discipline to start from that big pastiche and construct it in this way where, as we're saying it, there's always a strong dramatic question. There's something pulling us through. It's not just a wandering movie with kind of like random back-to-back scenes that have nothing in common or don't pull us through with any dramatic question. It feels very strong in that way, but it began from this really organic process of just like discovering these characters through vignettes in their life. So I think it just shows that the writing process can go in all different directions, different orders. And, you can start with that big, wide open, just exploration if you have the discipline to then take that and hone it down and be brutal, like I think she was to her own writing in this movie, to just all these scenes became 5-second clips, and that was what the movie needed.
First of all, her process stresses me out. It's not how I write at all. Yeah. It sounds so overwhelming to me, but I think it's fascinating. Her background as an actor and coming from the mumblecore scene, I think is really interesting here and how it speaks into this movie. But this is not a mumblecore movie. It is
Right.
very much an actor's movie where it's showcasing the characters, because it's not a movie about an alien invasion or time travel or anything like that. So you can kind of feel the mumblecore roots in some ways, but the scenes, especially those longer ones, are scenes where there's conflict, there's change, right? It's when we get to the end of it, there's no question in my mind, we're at the end of this scene and there has been a shift for the characters. And I think that it's like, which I don't often feel in mumblecore movies, where I'm like, I'm not entirely sure that was a scene, which is fine. That's not necessarily what I watch those kinds of movies for. But it's amazing how accessible and refreshing it makes this movie, that it's a movie to its core, while also borrowing these interesting principles from that different style of filmmaking.
Yeah, I was thinking about both her movies and Noah Baumbach's movies, because they are not only partners, but have made movies together that she has written and he's directed. And yeah, like I agree with you that the first like decade of movies, I had that feeling of like, I like this and it's interesting and there's cool stuff here, but I don't know. But then both with Lady Bird and with Marriage Story, I felt like, oh yeah, you've like learned kind of how to craft a movie that feels like I don't know if mainstream is the right word, but like a movie anyone can watch that still is doing all of that stuff that most movies don't do, where you're really exploring the characters. You're really kind of, the dialogue is like really beautiful and stuff. You're not just like putting pieces on a chessboard the way a lot of movies are, where you're just kind of like, what's the most passable dialogue we can have? It's like, no, you feel the reality of it all, but it's now being crafted in a way that can make a Lady Bird or make a Marriage Story, or the probably the best example is make a Little Women, where then it's like, now that you've made Lady Bird, you can go on to actually like make a real, again, I don't know if blockbuster's the right word, but like a real big movie that's like based on a classic novel, and it's going to feel like a real movie, right? It's not going to feel like we gave the keys to the wrong person to to drive this boat. I don't know what
bus.
I stopped listening to whatever I was saying like a minute ago.
Yeah, everything you guys are identifying, I definitely feel, because the mumblecore thing can turn me off super fast. But I feel like this movie, as we're pointing out, has a plot. She has a pretty clear character arc. There are very clear markers along the way, but the execution of it does feel like this kind of really honest portrayal of how real life is, without copying and pasting real life dialogue into the movie, because that's not what movies are. That's not why we're here. But there are just these moments that are just so efficient, or reveal kind of the inner life of the character, that are just like these tiny things. And like a couple ones that jumped out to me were when she's dating Danny and they go to see the band and she sees Timothée Chalamet for the first time, and we have that kind of back and forth. And we see her, see him, and we see her thinking, and then she just turns and gives Danny like a kiss. And like, you can just, there's so much 2 + 2 happening there, right?
Planted.
right, where we understand that, and like her affirming to herself that she still has feelings for Danny is signaling that there's something complicated here, and maybe something has been stirred by this Timothée Chalamet character. Or when she and her mom are shopping for the dress, there's a bunch of great moments, but there's passive aggressive back and forth where they're like, an argument is brewing, but then they find the right dress, and immediately they're like, oh my God, this is it. And like, that is just super efficient, shows so much, and is part of also what's so well drawn about these characters and the mother-daughter relationship, is that that they love each other. They know that they love each other, but that doesn't mean anything's easier or less complicated. And I feel like I've never seen a movie hold all of that in a way that felt so effortless and real at the same time.
I was super struck by that exact moment when I watched it this time around, because it just feels so well observed, like so borrowed out of life. It has to be real, or just like an honest look at these characters where the switch happens so quick, right? They're just like, I don't agree with you about this. I don't like this. We're fighting. Her mom's like, you're dragging your feet. I just thought you were tired, like being the most passive aggressive person ever. And then Lady Bird calls her out on it. And then she's like, oh my God. And then they cut away from it immediately. And actually what they cut to is her mom sitting up late at night, altering the dress to make it fit perfectly. And it's just a beautiful little moment. And the movie does this all the time. I think the POV is really interesting, where we actually get quite a few scenes just from the mom's point of view, to keep us like, so we're not, it is definitely Lady Bird's story, but she's not the only person that changes, right? We see that. There's movement on her mother's side as well. And so cutting it to that just little, it's just, I don't know, maybe 2-second clip of the mom sitting there. She's fixing the dress to make it actually perfect. It didn't fit perfect off the rack. She's going to make it perfect. It speaks about their financial situation. It also speaks about her mom's resourcefulness and about her care for Lady Bird. And it's just, that's the texture of this world that Greta Gerwig has created. It's so rich. You could watch this movie 100 times and pick up new little moments like that, because this movie is just full of them.
Well, I think that's why I love about the opening to this movie, because it's already all right there. We begin with them. The first moments in the car, they're crying together over an audiobook for Grapes of Wrath. And so that's great. Like it's such a great thing to throw us in. Like they are able to bond over something like an audiobook and have an emotional experience together. And then 5 minutes later, Lady Bird jumps out of the car. So the entirety of the entire spectrum of their relationship is captured in that scene, and the evolution and the descent into bickering happens very naturally. But I just love that up front we see how much love there is and how much they share actually with each other, in addition to also can't stand each other at other points. And it's all right there up front, and the movie never lets go of that duality, like you said, Michael.
Well, it reminds me so much, in our Devil Wears Prada video, we talked about how the opening 10 minutes of that, but especially the confrontation between Andy and Miranda at the beginning of The Devil Wears Prada, is a microcosm of the entire movie, right? And that's exactly what the scene in the car is. It's like, Lady Bird and her mom are going to have conflict. The conflict will escalate. Lady Bird will get out of the conflict by doing something self-destructive. You have seen the entire movie now.
Right.
Yep.
Have you ever wanted to know how to make a feature film? Or to better understand how online copyright works? Or to learn how fast turnaround content creators get their videos out so fast? If yes, then we have just the thing for you. Nebula Classes. Nebula Classes are full-length classes from your favorite creators, and I've got a great one to recommend to you. Our friend Patrick Willems has created a class called How to Make a Movie. In this comprehensive class, Patrick Willems teaches you the basics of making a feature film by deconstructing the production of his first movie, Night of the Coconut. Googly eyes and coconut not included. And there are even more classes from Thomas Frank, Legal Eagle, Renee Ritchie, Amy Nolte, Sam from Wendover, Georgia Dow, and a handful of others. We have a new class dropping every week, led by your favorite creators and experts in their fields. Better yet, Classes is part of Nebula, the subscription streaming service home to ad-free and exclusive content from all your favorite educational-ish creators, now including Beyond the Screenplay. So, when you sign up for Nebula Classes, you'll also get access to all of the exclusive and ad-free content from all of our creators, as well as awesome Nebula originals like Wendover's Colorado River documentary, and of course, Patrick Willems' feature, Night of the Coconut. There are over 10,000 videos on Nebula with new things to discover every day. And you can watch all of this great stuff just about anywhere with our iPhone, iPad, Android, Android TV, Apple TV, and Roku apps. The whole thing, Nebula Classes including full access to Nebula, is less than $150 a year. But if you visit nebulaclasses.com/beyondthescreenplay, you can sign up for the annual plan for only $119 per year. If you're already a Nebula subscriber, upgrading to classes is $99. So head to nebulaclasses.com/beyondthescreenplay to sign up for Nebula classes, check out Patrick Willem's class on how to make a movie, and get access to the thousands of videos on Nebula. Thanks to Nebula for sponsoring Beyond the Screenplay.
Well, yeah, speaking of Devil Wears Prada, we could sort of transition into talking about the character arcs. And this also relates to what we were just talking about of how much is in this movie. Because I was thinking like the musical, that could have been the frame of the whole movie, right? Or her relationship with Danny, that could have been the frame of the whole movie, right? Where like, she walks in on him, the crisis, and then like the ending is her like dealing with it. But this movie just sort of is like, no, we told a little story and that story is over and these characters still exist in this world. Danny is still there through the end of the movie. But then the other one is the sort of Mean Girls, Devil Wears Prada arc that we get with Lady Bird, which is, Act 1, she wants to be someone else, something else. She and Julie are just like, we want to be prettier. I want to live on the East Coast. I wish I could live in that house. I wish we had this money, And then Act 2 is like, oh, she kind of gets a little bit of what she wants. She makes friends with like the pretty girl, whatever, and she's like now dating the cool guy, and she doesn't have time for her like nerdy friend anymore. And then at the end, it's the synthesis, right? It's the like, oh, now I realize like I actually love my friend and I love my mom and I love my city and all this kind of stuff. I can still go east. I can still do whatever. But yeah, all of those stories are like micro stories in this bigger story just about Lady Bird's overall kind of character arc. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting in this movie that they like, there isn't, I love Trisha. I always think about, you call it the, This Is What I Want song. I think, is that how you refer to it? Like every musical has
in a Disney musical,
yeah. But then, you pointed out in a non-musical where you were talking about, I forget what movie, but like how movies have that too, where it's like the speech about, I really want to do this thing. And we don't get that here because then that would make this movie feel too much like a movie. Instead, you get all of the, like this continuing, like, what have we heard this character talk about over and over again is, oh, I wish I was that. I wish I was this. I wish I didn't live here. I wish I didn't have this thing. I wish I had that thing over there. So then you sort of put all those together in your head. And then, of course, over the course of the movie, by the time you get to the end and you see the completion of both her and, as you said, her mom's character arc, then you realize, oh, I did see a movie. Maybe I didn't realize it was happening while it was happening, but I absolutely understand what these characters wanted, what they thought they wanted, what they needed, what they got, and where we are at the end.
Yeah, I think that Mean Girls arc is really clear in the movie because there's a series of things that kind of come crashing down. There's the bad sex and the realizing that the Timothée Chalamet character was lying about being a virgin. There's her lying about which house she lives in coming out. So there's kind of a nice arc of like, she's become this other person that she says she wants to be, partially through lying, partially through kind of just like being with a crowd that seems cool. And then there's a nice kind of like brick by brick, like dismantling of that facade until it's all the way down to prom night. And it's like, where do I want to be right now? I want to be with my best friend. And that is part of what makes it, like we've been saying, feel like a movie and not a mumblecore string of things. Like you do have a really nice flow there. And then it all comes together, like you said, Brian, in this beautiful synthesis at the end where she does escape Sacramento, get to, the place she wanted to go on the East Coast. And yet she now has this new appreciation and love and almost nostalgia for Sacramento that is shown so beautifully in that final scene.
I also like that her third, romantic interest in the movie, like, we don't care. Like, we're not like, well, she finally found happiness. Like, no, this is just a guy, whatever.
She threw up immediately.
Yeah.
Right. That brick by brick dismantling that you're talking about, Alex, I was really tuned into of that, the Act 2B, which we've talked about, is maybe the, as you said, Trisha, the dramatic question is maybe the most vague. Not that it's like vague, but like that's the period where I am sort of like, wow, okay, so now what? Like I'm just kind of going on this road, like floating through these things with you, and maybe intentionally not thinking about it's intentional that we're not conscious of the college thing. But I think there's so many things happening for her and her character arc and the relationships during that period that each like moment to moment is compelling and thought provoking and bringing her like I was able to follow emotionally the sort of slow maturation that she was going through, even just with like small moments of, post the bad sex with Timothée Chalamet, she comes down and like sees his dad just sitting there in the living room. And it's like, oh, right. Like he talked about like his dad was dying. And like these little moments that kind of like recontextualize everything. And I feel like that's kind of a little bit how I read her journey by the end, or like this kind of take on growing up is almost like seeing the beauty and appreciating the things that you already have and like the meaning that is there and not just trying to like escape from it. And yeah, I can't quite describe it, but I feel like no other movie has made me go on that journey and feel it in such a honest, not saccharine, not beating you over the head with it, but just like an honest, quiet feeling of what it does feel like to slowly realize that you look at the world different now because you're not a kid anymore.
And I think that moment in the car on the way to prom is such a perfect expression of the feeling that I've had before of like the disillusionment with you thought these kids were cool. You thought this is what you wanted. And you realize I want nothing to do with these people. Like, I don't want to go hang out with them at their friend's house tonight. I want to be with my real friends. And I think that the movie captures that adolescent experience so well too, where you think you found a group that like is appealing for these reasons. And then you have this like aha moment of like, I just don't want to be here anymore. There's a place that I actually want to be. And it's the place that I was trying to get away from. Mm-hmm.
I love the exchange. My job is to help you be realistic. Yeah, that seems like everyone's job, right? Or it's like she spends especially the first act, as I was just talking about, being like, these are the things that I want. These are the things that I don't have and everything. And, I was just thinking about, obviously people grow up at different ages. People have different experiences in their lives. But I was just like, I feel like your teen years, they're like the best and worst times of your life because everything is an extreme, right? Everything is like the best thing that's ever happened or the worst thing that's ever happened. And then you hit sort of college age and then you start to be a little more cynical, but you also start to be a little more in control of your feelings and your experiences and all that kind of stuff. And literally a character going from high school into college, is sort of what we're seeing here. And I like that we see her transition from both super idealistic, but also, maybe dramatic about things to kind of, again, synthesizing, fusing all that stuff together and finding a balance by the end.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And psychologically speaking, what happens when we grow up is we attain the ability to step outside of ourselves and start to like, what you go through in adolescence is moving from like essentially like self-preservation and self-absorption in childhood, right? In childhood, you don't really think much about how other people feel because that's like an evolutionary response, right? Like you're in childhood, you're like a vulnerable mammal over there that just needs to survive. And so you're not thinking about larger systems and other people and all this stuff. You can't take in like the scope of the world, right? And then as you move more into maturity, you're able, like your brain literally like is able to take in more of that. And you become more aware of both like systems and like people around you in a way that you weren't aware before. And so I think, this movie is about essentially a self-absorbed teenager who's only worried about what's going on in her own life and how she feels about things. And her mom is constantly being like, you never think about other people. Like, the scene where, Lady Bird hasn't put her clothes away. She comes back from homecoming or whatever that dance is where they're dressed like cowboys. And to your point about this movie, like expressing the extremes of adolescence, right? She comes running up and she just like screams before she goes in the door. She's like, she's so happy because of what happened with Danny. Mm-hmm. She goes in and then her mom is scolding her, right? She's like, you have to put your clothes away. Like, this makes us look like trash. Some of your friends fathers could employ your father, but they won't if you look like trash. And then Lady Bird says, like, didn't you ever just not put your clothes away perfectly once when you were my age? It's that push and pull of somebody asking you to think of something other than what's immediately going on in your life. And in fairness, her mother is doing it in the most passive, aggressive,
Right.
sometimes just straight aggressive and uncaring way possible, right? But that is what she's asking Lady Bird to do. And it goes back to, and obviously her mom has her own insecurities and everything, and problems in her life. But I think it's really interesting that the movie kind of reaches out to encompass that for us, where we're absorbed in Lady Bird's story and what's happening with her thematically. And then we're invited into like thinking more broadly about the world, and to include her mother and her mother's feelings and her mother's life and history. And I love the POV shift at the airport, right? Where it's like she drops off Lady Bird, and we could stay with Lady Bird and her dad while her dad walks her to the gate or to security or whatever it is. But instead we stay with her mom in the car, and her mom drives around to the airport exit, and we just see her break down. It does that POV shift where, again, we're invited to think about how her mom thinks instead of what Lady Bird is going through in that moment.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of that whole sequence and what follows, you guys mentioned the ending early on. What do you guys want to talk about in that sequence and what follows?
Yeah, I think for me, what was interesting, like you mentioned earlier, Alex, disillusionment. And part of me watching this was like, is this like a disillusionment arc? Because it feels that way, kind of, but it also is like a growth story where like she gets what she wants and is disappointed by it, and then gets what she needs, but also like gets what she wants. Like, I don't know, it somehow manages to like kind of wear all the hats of, as far as endings go, of like, is this a downer ending? Is this a positive ending that's coming of age? It's like she and her mom may have found understanding of each other, but we don't get to see them have that moment. Like, we don't get to see them recognize that in each other, but we know that it's there. And I just think it's such an interesting kind of bittersweet balancing of all these things that really works. And I feel like, again, I haven't seen anything else pull off in a way that feels emotionally impactful and honest to the story and honest to reality, and leaves you satisfied while also wanting things to have been different in the way that you want people to feel at the end of a movie. So I think it has a lot of different elements that kind of pull me in different ways that somehow altogether work really nicely.
It strives not to be saccharine, as we were saying with the rest of the movie, right? And it feels, I think it would be unearned for them to have the big rom-com hug in the airport. Mm-hmm. So instead, we as the audience get to see each of them have their closure to their own personal arcs, right? So we see the mom run and want to do the rom-com ending, but it's too late because for both, it's not just, oh, shame on you. It's no, for both of you, this is a complicated relationship. But like, also, what lesson does that tell, you, the audience, of like, make sure the people in your life you love know you love them, because you may not get to see them. It's not like she dies, but like, it's that kind of thing, right? Where it's like, you don't get to always have that kind of ending. And then we have Lady Bird finding the letters, right? So it's like, now we have her kind of closure of this arc. But it's so beautiful, as you were saying, Michael, and bittersweet, that they don't actually get it together. They get it separately, and like at a distance. And then literally we end on her leaving a message, not even talking to her mom, but leaving a message, which is sort of her way of reaching out. And then the mom's going to hear it later, and then she's going to feel that closure. And then eventually after that, they'll have a phone call, right? It's this sort of, and again, it feels more real. It's not just this like, I have to tell you I love you and blah, blah, blah. It's like, you don't have those moments. You have these little kind of push pulls. It kind of reminds me of the end of Lost in Translation a little bit, where it's like, there's an understanding, but things don't happen the way that you expect them to have. And yeah, it's really interesting. And I feel like in a movie where you could start to fall away a little bit from the plot, that like that ending really pulls me back in, where I'm just like, I'm like more focused in that ending than I had been for a little while because of everything that it's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would have been so easy to cut to Laurie Metcalf standing and listening to that message, right? Yeah. It would have just been the easiest thing in the world, and they didn't do it. And I love that, right? It leaves space for this movie, again, to feel grounded. The POV shift is so smart, where it's just like, we're only seeing Lady Bird in this moment. So she's just talking into the phone and just kind of sending her message out into space with a little bit of faith that it's going to reach her mom. And I think it's interesting too, we don't have to talk about it, but the role that religion, but also like Sacramento, like it feels like the school and the city are like doing symbolic work, right? About like the way that Lady Bird was raised and her family. And so, you know, she has that line where she says like, people will call themselves by names their parents gave them, but they won't believe in God, right? This idea that like our parents are God in a way to us. And so she walks into a church and then like listens to a choir and then walks out and kind of sends up a prayer to her mom at the end. I just think it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
One other thing about this whole ending sequence I love is that we see her fumbling in her new life. You know, it's not like she arrives to college and is like,
right,
now I am the new Lady Bird, you know, now going by my given name, and I have matured and I am done and I'm an adult now. Like, she immediately is stumbling with her confidence, where she says Sacramento is where she's from at first. He doesn't hear her. No, San Francisco. Like she kind of like regresses to like lying again because she wants to be cool, and then she drinks too much and throws up, and so I think it's just super, super honest. Like, we're not getting this generic movie linear evolution of she had her like catharsis in X scene, so now she is like the fully formed like new version of herself. She still has her old pattern. She's still fumbling. She's still trying to figure out how she wants to present herself in this new life. And it just feels so honest. And I love that.
Yeah. It's almost a little bit like, you know, we've talked about recently, like short third acts. And this is almost like the most short third acty thing you can do in some ways, of like, it's almost like before the climax, before you, as, right, as you were putting up, before we get to see them together, it ends. But we know, because of the pieces that have been given to us, what probably happens next. And that gets to be in our imaginations, which is cool. Why don't we go around and say what lessons we're going to take from Lady Bird? Before we do, reminder that next time we will be talking about Shawshank Redemption, which I've only seen once, and like kind of not really. It was like on TV and I was distracted. So it's effectively going to be
just
like
watching TBS in like the late 90s.
You know,
haven't seen Gladiator. Haven't really seen Shawshank.
Basically.
Who are you?
Vince, our producer, is yelling at me in the Slack right now. I guess he didn't know that either.
Wow.
Anyway, so it'll be kind of like seeing it for the first time, except I know everything that happens. But so that'll be next time. For now, lessons we're going to take away from Lady Bird. Brian, do you want to start us off?
Sure. You know, we've talked a lot about complicated characters, but we don't talk a lot about complicated relationships, which we've talked about plenty, during this episode. And I feel like when you think about most relationships in movies, it's either one thing, these two hate each other, and like maybe by the end, there's like a little like, you're not so bad, right? You can be my wingman any day, whatever. Or it's the Mean Girls kind of thing of like the relationship is this, and then it changes to this. And then maybe it comes back at the end. And, you know, this movie, we have so many, you know, specifically between her and her mom, but all the relationships in this movie are just complicated. You know, it's just, as you were saying, Trish, it's like, yeah, we love each other. We drive each other crazy. Do we like each other? I don't really know. It depends. And like we're, you know, both, the Grapes of Wrath scene and the dress scene is like the 180 that happens over just a few minutes, where we haven't even like moved forward in time at all. We've just spent 3 minutes with these characters, and they've gone from like hugging to wanting to punch each other or something. And you know, I think it's a really good tool to have in your toolkit. It also It's not always necessary if you're doing a simple genre movie or a movie with tons of characters. Sometimes you really do need to just say, like, these relationships have to be kind of as simple as possible. But especially in dramas with just a few characters, you know, there's maybe 8 characters at most in this movie who are really meaningful, probably more like 6. It's really great to remember our real relationships in life are often a multitude of things at once. You know, the person you love the most in your world, you've probably screamed at or been really annoyed with or something. And people that you know, that guy who comes to the party that you don't like, every once in a while you have a good time. And you're like, you know what, that guy's okay. So it's something I've been working on my own writing. I'm working on something right now where a couple breaks up pretty quickly into a story. And I'm like, you need to know why they're a couple in the first place. Cause you always have the stories where, like, why are they together? Like, why didn't she leave years ago? Right. But so you need to kind of see that, but you also need to be happy when they break up. Right. And it's like, you have, in a short amount of time, you need to kind of show, and we get that a lot. Like we were talking about Michael Madsen in Thelma and Louise. Right. It's just this sort of complicated relationship. Even Michael Madsen in Reservoir Dogs, much more one-dimensional character, but he has a certain loyalty there, right, to like certain people and then not to others and that kind of thing.
Listen to our Patreon exclusive
on Reservoir Dogs
to hear more.
It's nice to remember that relationships can be complicated and not just always one thing until they change. They can be multiple things even in the same scene.
Yeah.
It's like the adage of simple plot, complex characters.
Right.
I feel like this movie is like the narrative fuel that you really get from that, as you're pointing out, can be these complex relationships between these complex characters. And that can take something that on paper can be simple, but then in execution can be extremely compelling and moving.
I also, real quick, I love when she and Lucas Hedges are talking outside, like the building, and then she just goes from being mad at him to hugging him like immediately, and that just feels so beautiful and not forced.
Mm-hmm. Good performances in this movie. Like, it's kind of upsetting. Maybe that'll be my lesson. I've decided that is now my lesson. Do good performances.
Yes. Have actors be good.
Just because we're sort of on this and that spurt of thought, I'll insert myself here. But what does a scene need to be? And I think when you have a simple plot but complex characters, complex relationships, I think you in some ways get some leeway about what a scene can be, where it can be, as you were saying, Trisha, there are these big full scenes where there's this huge 180 that is done in these great actory performances and big explosive moments. But there's also these like quiet moments that we've talked about that are just these kind of like slices of life. And I feel like too often I have like a preset template of what a scene is supposed to be and like when it should start and then this should happen and then this should be a thing and that's what a scene is. And I feel like this movie has so many great examples of a scene, if it's the right slice of life, can just be the slice of life. Or Lady Bird realizing that Julie's not in class anymore. It can just be a shot of her. It's a 2-shot. We see her. We see the empty desk. She looks over, cut away. We know what's happening. And so like, I think this movie is a really inspirational source to go to as far as like, what does a scene need to be? And it probably can be way less than you think it is, as long as it's accomplishing all the things that you want it to do. And this movie somehow has all these brief, beautiful moments that do everything it needs and with very little.
It's like the opening, the opening montage of Up, that whole thing, right? Where it's just like, here, it's a bunch of really quick vignettes that tell you this like 80-year, very in-depth emotional story in a short amount of time.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Trisha, what's your lesson?
My lesson is just have a football coach take over your drama department.
Amazing.
Which is one of my favorite little scenes. It's the most like probably overtly comedic scene in it, where it's just like, this would not happen actually, but it's really funny to watch.
It's actually the one part of the movie that breaks the spell a little
It
bit
totally
for me.
does.
Because
It totally
it's like,
does.
oh, now we're in a little bit over the top, goofy territory.
But the payoff for it at the end,
good.
when he like jumps up and it's like
Yeah.
goal, basically, like I feel like the payoff made it work, like made it okay.
And I feel like, real quick to add to that, like this movie takes a bunch of things we've seen before in like high school comedies or whatever,
Right.
but it's a twist on it, you know, because we've seen the coach take out, like I think in Freaks and Geeks or whatever, like the coach taking over a class we're not supposed to teach, and they're just awkward. They don't really know what they're doing, and they're yelling at the students and whatever. But this is like a coach really invested in doing a thing, and he's going to do the playbook, you know, like all that kind of stuff. And like that we haven't seen before. So it's like we've seen the gag before, but we haven't seen this version of the gag before.
Anyway, that's not actually my lesson.
I know.
It's like, I just love that little moment. But no, so it's really interesting. This movie is a lot about money, or there's a lot of conversation about money in this movie. And I think that so money is a real world problem. And it's one that in our culture in the United States, it's really kind of taboo to talk about it out in the open. And I feel like when we get movies that are about class, they're often like really dramatic examples. They're like Titanic or, you know, or they're about like extreme poverty, right? Or something like that. And it's interesting that this movie is just about like lower middle class or like working class people, and then people who are in like upper middle class, like kind of thing. So the variation in like their poverty level versus that of her friends on paper doesn't necessarily seem ripe for conflict, right? Like, and if the movie didn't make a lot of it, we probably wouldn't notice it at all, right? But it's interesting that becomes a primary source of conflict in the movie. And because it is kind of a taboo topic in American culture, like, you know, we're not allowed to like ask people their incomes. We're not supposed to ask your friends or whatever. Like there is some sense of sensitivity around it. I think that it makes a lot of the scenes with her mom, who is, you know, obviously struggling with this, it just makes them feel really brutal and raw. And like, even just the scene where she's in the grocery store, she's like, I want to read this magazine. It's only $3. And her mom's like, too bad, you know, you can read it at the library. And she's like, well, but I want to read it in bed. She's like, that's what rich people do. We're not rich people. And just like flat says a lot of that stuff flatly. That is a refrain we hear from her mom all the time. Like, and then, you know, it comes to a head, like it's all building up to that scene where, you know, Lady Bird says, give me a number, right? Tell me how much it took to raise me and I'll pay you back. Her mom's like, you'll never be able to get a job that good to pay me back for this. It becomes all about money, and it feels really thorny and ugly to hear this family arguing about money because it is such a sticking point for her mom. And I think we don't often see that depicted in quite this nuanced way, but the movie constantly reminds us of it in dialogue, that this is part of the problem, that Lady Bird's mother wishes she could give Lady Bird more, right? Like she wishes she could do this and that. And, but Lady Bird clearly wishes she had more. She wishes she lived in a bigger house. She wishes she had more affluent friends and she didn't have to, you know, she could go to this rich people's college or whatever it is. But her mother has never been able to provide her with that. Her dad is unemployed. And it becomes probably the primary source of conflict in this movie in a way that feels realistic and grounded. Like, again, I feel like movies as a rule tend toward extremes. We tend toward extreme topics and sources of drama, which makes total sense. Those are cinematic. But this actually has a lot of texture to it. And the movie just doesn't have a lot of work to do in making us feel that squeeze on money in the family. There's that scene in the grocery store where they're shopping, where her brother is bagging groceries. And her mom's like, is this with your employee discount? He's like, yes, it is. And she's like, oh, you know, just there's moments like that everywhere, at every moment that make us feel that money is tight and just feel the tension of what's broken in this relationship with her and her mom. Or part of what's broken is the very real life stress. People get divorced every day because of money. Families break up and argue and like tear each other apart over money. And it's real and it's hard to depict on screen. This movie is a wonderful example, and it gives the conflict teeth.
Yeah.
Totally.
There's that really kind of beautiful but also heartbreaking scene right after, again, like the bad sex, and her mom comes to pick her up and she starts crying. And they're like, let's do our favorite activity, which is going to what house is on
Open
sale,
houses.
essentially. And essentially like pretending that they like had another
rich,
life or a window into another life, which is something that they both want. And I think that is just another interesting aspect of that dynamic that even the dad calls out at some point of like, you're both kind of two alike and both stubborn and strong personalities and all these things. And I think it's just a really interesting thing. And as you're saying, I think it is surprisingly like raw and sharp, all the money talk in this that does like made me uncomfortable almost, because it's like, no, we're not supposed to, like, this is too, like many things in this movie, this is too real. The awkwardness of high school, this is too real. I didn't need to feel this again. Like, this is too well observed in some ways. But yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. All right. And Alex, what's your lesson?
Well, kind of going off of that, I mean, one of my favorite scenes in this movie is when she's with her kind of nun advisor, played by Lois Smith, that wonderful character. Just love her so much. And she points out, like, it seems like you really love Sacramento. And she's like, oh, I just pay attention. And she points out, well, attention is like a form of love. And I think that is why this movie feels so special, is because there's all the things we're talking about, you know, like Greta Gerwig paid attention to life and to all these little things, the way that money does stress relationships in a very real way that has teeth and stakes. And just the way that she just observes like how you talk in high school. Like, I love the confidence with which Lady Bird tells like Julie, I think we're past the learning portion of high school. You know, like I remember like making those statements, you know, like we're seniors, like we're done with high school. Like, you know, and it just feels so real and so just nostalgic and wonderful to have somebody pay attention to life in that detail and then like share it, you know, reflect it back to us as an audience. And I think the other aspect of that paying attention is an attention to all the little supporting characters, including the drama teacher who kind of disappears at a certain point, and all we see is
Dune.
Father Dune. He all we see of him after kind of his early part of the movie is he's in some kind of psychiatric consultation with her mom at the hospital. And we just have this like rumor of like his son committed suicide, and really like, you know, he's got this beautiful spirit and he really cares about the play, and he's sad that the audience didn't get it. And just what a beautiful three-dimensional character who plays a very small role in the film, but the time he's there is so like moving because he's such a full person. And so, yeah, it's just, this movie reminded me of another movie that I watched recently for the umpteenth time, which is Children of Men. Because both of these movies, I think, have that attention to detail in every single little piece of set decoration to supporting character to extra. There's like a love and an integrity to like its portrayal of the whole world, where nobody's judged, everybody is flawed, everybody is worthy of love, and you feel that in this movie. I've been thinking about this subject a lot lately because what I've been watching recently is Children of Men, and I watched it for a podcast called My Favorite Movie Is, hosted by Larry Freed. And it was great because I got to just basically ramble at him for a good hour about my favorite movie, which is Children of Men. And a big topic of conversation was exactly this, which is, why does this movie feel so special in its portrayal of this dystopian future? Why does it feel unique compared to like other kind of more generic Hollywood portrayals of a dystopian or future world. And it's exactly this thing, which is like the camera will pan across a refugee in a cage or a woman on the street or somebody in an office, and they just feel like 100% a real person. They're not like an extra just kind of made up for a sci-fi movie. They like have a whole life, and you can feel the weight of their whole life in that moment. And I just think it's really special when a filmmaker cares enough to do that for every part of their movie. And I think both Lady Bird, I feel that, and also Children of Men, always recommend a rewatch of that movie because every inch of that frame has that integrity. And also, if you want to hear me talk about this for a good 45 minutes, listen to the podcast. My favorite movie is.
I did listen to it, Alex. It's a lovely episode.
Thank you.
I'm excited.
Larry, faithful patron, has now collected us all.
Yes,
it seems.
Got to catch them all. He did.
Right. I had a Star Wars, Trisha did Jurassic Park, Brian Fight Club, and now Children of Men.
It's a good 4 episodes.
Yeah. Well, what else have people been watching? Trisha, what have you been watching recently?
So I am not all the way through it. I'm only about halfway through it, but I'm going to let you know that I am in the middle of Elvis from 2022, Baz Luhrmann's new movie about
You're taking
Elvis.
a break.
I was like, what is this long, like, limited series that she must be watching when she's happening?
It is a film
Coming up
called
for air.
Elvis. Yeah, wow. It is like everything Baz Luhrmann has made. It is immersive. You forget when you're watching it that there's a world outside of what you're watching. Like I said, it's directed by Baz Luhrmann. It stars Tom Hanks and Austin Butler. Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I don't know. Like, Tom Hanks is doing a lot. Like, I mean, everybody's doing a lot. Baz is doing a lot. Everybody's doing so much. But Tom Hanks's performance is quite something. He's just playing a very larger than life character. And of course, you know, it's this really heightened reality. It's like very, very stylized, very cutty. And he's narrating so much of it. And he's playing a character. Tom Hanks plays a character a little similar to Tommy Wiseau in some ways because
What?
He plays Colonel Tom Parker, who was Elvis's manager. And Colonel Tom Parker was originally a Dutch immigrant, but his whole life, after he came to the States, he basically said he was just a farm boy from West Virginia, but he clearly has like a really Dutch accent. So he's very much trying to be this like enigmatic person that nobody knew a lot about during his life, but was like very larger than life. Anyway, the person who is working for me a lot is Austin Butler. Actually, he's doing an amazing job. I had my doubts going into this because how could anybody play Elvis? But Austin Butler is doing a fantastic job. I'm very impressed by his performance. And also, there's a Moulin, I'm sure you've heard, but there's a Moulin Rouge thing going on with the music where there's a lot of remixes and like modern pop music blended in with like classic Elvis music and stuff from the time. So actually that's also really working for me. Honestly, I'm very entertained. It's a lot to process and I'm not done with it. Maybe I'll hate the second half, but the first half is I'm really enjoying for what it is. So
The trailers were a lot to process, so I can't imagine the whole movie.
I mean, you know, one thing I love about Baz is just he's gonna go for it, man.
Right.
And I just respect the hell out of that.
The Great Gatsby, I think I like it. Every time I think back, I'm like, God, like watching that was a lot. Like, I don't know if this is good, but man, I kind of love it. Like, and I feel like, I don't know, just that excess that he can put sometimes really works for me.
The sheer like will
right.
to do all this.
It's something to look at.
Exactly.
Excellent. Cool. All right. Brian, what have you been watching?
Speaking of bumpy rides, I have been watching The Sandman on Netflix, which is the adaptation of Neil Gaiman's graphic novel series. And I'm a huge Neil Gaiman fan, and I've read almost everything he's done. The show is it's rough. Like production value is rough. Directing is a little rough. Writing sometimes a little rough. And there's like an aspect ratio problem. And I Googled it and they're like,
okay,
we wanted it to feel. Yeah, they're like, we wanted it to feel dreamy. And I'm like, then you just made people the wrong size. Like what?
Like, Michael, it's like as if they shot it with like some anamorphic like lens or yeah, basically something where it's like it's like people are squished like vertically, and they were not they were not de-squished. They just left it squished.
And it's not just like only like there are scenes where it's just like takes place on Earth, like in normal world, and the aspect. So it's not just, we did this just for the like dream sequences.
Like
or
every scene is squished.
Yeah. So, when we talked about Foundation, we're like, how does this show look so gorgeous and so much like TV in like a bad way, right? And this doesn't, not just looks like TV, it looks like TV for like BBC shows from like the early aughts or something. Like it has that kind of quality to it. That being said, it's a really cool story. It took me a couple episodes to kind of find my footing of just the story world and the characters and stuff. But once I did, there are some really beautiful episodes. There's some really like fun sequences and stuff. And, I'm the kind of person I'd rather watch a 7 out of 10 bonkers, interesting story that I've never seen before than a 10 out of 10 movie I've seen 100 times before, unless it's Top Gun Maverick. So yeah, I think it's like, if it's kind of your thing, then I would say absolutely give it a shot. If you tried a couple episodes, I'd say stick with it. Tom Sturridge plays Dream, the main character. And then there's David Thewlis, Gwendolyn Christie, Jenna Coleman, Boyd Holbrook, Patton Oswalt, John Cameron Mitchell, Stephen Fry. Like it's got a lot to deliver. It's got a lot of really cool stories and stuff. Just know that it's a bit of a bumpy ride, and you're going to be taken out of it once in a while because of just the way it looks.
Wonder if there'll be like a fan made
de-squished,
de-stretched.
I am having to like stop myself from going to make that right now. Someone has done that.
I'll watch that version. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, something that is visually stunning is The Tragedy of Macbeth, which I recently watched. And I like fell in love with this movie so hard. So this was my first like start to finish experience of Macbeth just as a story. So that also, was cool to be like, oh yeah, this is that thing that everyone's talking about. The Shakespeare guy, he's got some stuff going on.
It's heavily abridged, right? Like they cut a ton out of it. I mean, like not like a lot, but like there's a lot.
I know nothing about any of that, but whatever they did to it, I liked it. Okay. Just the filmmaking, like top to bottom, is just insanely amazing. And so screenplay directed by Joel Cohen, Denzel is amazing.
Yes.
Frances McDormand is amazing. All of the other characters are amazing. Like all the performances are so great. When adapting something like Shakespeare, as I've seen other ones, it can be tricky. There's a lot of things to balance. You can go with the Romeo plus Juliet Baz Luhrmann version, which is just like bombard people with an audiovisual experience. So it's okay if you're 13 and you don't quite understand what everybody's saying, you're still getting it. I really liked that in this movie, it's slow and paced, and every shot is extremely like immaculately composed. The performances absolutely cue you in on the emotional experience and everything that's happening, and the visuals. It's just, all of the things are working together. It's black and white. It has the 4:3 aspect ratio. There's a ton of visual effects that most people probably would never even think of or know, but just like down to the shadows. When they get off the horse and they walk up to this person, we replaced all the shadows so that the shadows would be like the right mood and size in order to make an impact. So just like every frame of this movie is gorgeous, and then what's happening within every shot with all those frames is even better. I'm like obsessed with it. So
I'm sold. I gotta watch this.
You haven't seen it, Alex?
I haven't.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. Oh, it's so good.
It's like it takes place in a surreal dream world.
Yeah.
And I feel like that really does a lot for like the buy-in of things. So anyway.
It's very German expressionist.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Well, I was
Very,
going to say,
very.
speaking, I was talking about BBC shows. Like, I'm a sucker for the BBC productions of Shakespeare plays from like the 80s and 90s, where it's just a black theater, and you're just watching, like, the cameras are kind of can go anywhere, but you're basically just watching people walk around an empty space. And the Tragedy of Macbeth is a good example of, they didn't have to do that for money reasons, but they did it anyway, where whenever someone's outdoors, it almost feels like they're on a stage, but a stage with no walls where you can kind of see forever. And it just really adds to the tone and the mood of the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. It both feels like a stage performance and a cinematic experience somehow all at once. And it was amazing. So,
Yay! I'm glad you
Thumbs
liked
up.
it.
yeah. Well, so this has been our conversation about Lady Bird. Lots of things that we covered, lots of good lessons. This is one that people should revisit if they haven't in a while. 'Cause it's really good. And I am now even more excited for Barbie to see.
Yeah.
What's next?
What's
Barbie.
next for Greta Gerwig.
Lighting Twitter aflame.
I'm ready. Just give it to me. I don't care what it is.
All those leaked set images that people are freaking out about.
It's amazing. What could it possibly be? Future Us knows.
Right.
And I'm excited to become Future Us.
Same day as Oppenheimer.
Really?
Yes. We'll have
For
a
now.
lot to
What
to
a
talk about that month.
Clash of the Titans.
Yeah.
Wow.
We're calling right now double episode. We're all going to go together
Oh my
for a
God.
double header.
Hot take of both of them all at once.
Right. But we can't talk about one and then the other. It has to be, the conversation has to always be talking about both at the same time. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Should half of us see one and half the other? Or should we watch half of one and then switch theaters so each of us has only seen half of each half?
Oh, 2023. It's going to be quite a year in cinema history.
We want to say a big thank you, as always, to the patrons that make this show possible. Our patron exclusive episode on Reservoir Dogs is available, so go check that out. I had not seen it since high school. We had some thoughts. It was a good conversation. It's a good movie. If you want to help us make more episodes and get fun perks like voting on what our monthly patron exclusive episode will be, head over to the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon. The link is in the show notes. Thank you to our producer, Vince Major, whose birthday is coming up and for whom we will be doing Shawshank Redemption next time. Thank you to our editors, Caleb Berg, Graham Harther, and Eric Schneider. I'm Michael Tucker, and I've been joined today by Trisha Rand, Brian Bittner, and Alex Calleros. All of our Twitter handles are in the show notes. Send us a tweet and say hi, and we will see you in the next episode for Shawshank Redemption.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.